I can still hear my brother's words echoing in my ears, sharp and deliberate, slicing through the air like they were designed to wound. "Your mum is the family failure," he said, smiling as if it were the funniest thing in the world. My children froze, their faces twisting in confusion and hurt, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink around us. I wanted to step forward, to correct him, to scream that he had no right, but the words caught in my throat. Every eye in the room turned to me, and in that instant, I felt the weight of a lifetime of dismissal, the subtle slights that had led to this crescendo of cruelty. My stomach churned, a mix of anger, shame, and disbelief, while my kids looked at me for some kind of defense I couldn't immediately provide. I remembered all the times he had undermined me, laughed at my ambitions, and flaunted his successes like a weapon. Each memory now fused with the present, intensifying the sting of his public insult. I could feel my pulse quicken as my mind raced. Should I confront him now? Or should I hold back and calculate my response? My children's small hands gripped mine tightly, seeking reassurance, and I felt the fire of protective rage ignite within me. I swallowed hard, forcing a calm I didn't feel, while he smirked, oblivious to the storm he had unleashed. As he continued speaking, turning casual remarks into tiny daggers, I realized this was no ordinary slight. It was a declaration of dominance, a challenge meant to belittle and humiliate me in front of those I loved most. I clenched my fists under the table, every instinct screaming at me to fight back. But I also knew that raw anger would play right into his hands. Instead, I let the silence speak for a moment, letting him feel the tension, the quiet yet unmistakable statement that I wasn't broken. My children's eyes searched mine, and I knew I had to be strong, to project calm even as my heart raced. By the time the conversation ended, and my brother wandered off with that infuriating smirk, I felt a mixture of shame, fury, and resolve. I couldn't erase the sting of his words, but I could channel it, turn it into something more than just humiliation. That moment, frozen in my mind, became the spark, the first thread of the plan that would eventually restore dignity, expose arrogance, and ensure that the one who thought he held power would learn exactly who truly controlled the story. It was the day I realized that silence could be a weapon, patience a strategy, and my brother's arrogance the key to his undoing. When we finally got home, the quiet of my apartment felt suffocating, almost mocking. My kids clung to me, their small hands pressing into mine as if they could anchor me. But I felt untethered, storming inside while wearing a mask of calm for their sake. I shut the door behind us and leaned against it, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, but the rage bubbling beneath the surface refused to dissipate. Anger, shame, and a protective instinct collided in my chest, and I could feel the tension in my shoulders, the tightness in my jaw. I wanted to scream, to call my brother every name I'd ever thought of, but instead, I sank onto the couch, letting the weight of it all crash over me. As I stared at my children safe in our home but wounded in spirit, memories flooded me, relentless and piercing. I remembered my brother as a kid, always getting the better hand, our parents cheering louder for him, celebrating every minor triumph while mine went unnoticed or quietly dismissed. I remembered being made to feel small, inadequate, invisible, as if my existence was merely the shadow of his. At birthdays, achievements, even in family gatherings, I'd been the overlooked one, the one expected to fail, the one whose successes were quietly minimized. It was a lifetime of subtle betrayals and favoritism that had shaped the man my brother thought he could mock so easily in front of my children. The shame crept in too, whispering that I should have done something differently in public, that my kids saw me as weak, that I had failed them somehow by not standing up. I closed my eyes and let the flashbacks continue, being told I wasn't good enough, overlooked for promotions, ignored at family dinners, and having my ideas stolen or ridiculed. I had always tried to rise above, to let patience be my ally, but those lessons felt fragile against the rawness of this public insult. My protective instinct flared. My children deserved better, deserved to know that the world's cruelty would never define them. I traced the lines of injustice, noticing the patterns I had once dismissed: favoritism, humiliation, arrogance, and the invisible ladder my brother had climbed by stepping on everyone else. And yet, as the anger coiled in me, a quiet clarity emerged. This time, I would not react blindly. I would not allow my brother's arrogance to define the day, the moment, or the narrative of our family. I would rise, yes, but with strategy, patience, and precision. The seeds of a plan began to form, small and fragile at first, but potent with the promise of vindication and the long-awaited reversal of power. Sitting alone that evening, the silence around me felt heavy, pressing in like it wanted to crush every ounce of confidence I had left. Memories of my childhood began to surface uninvited, vivid, and raw. I remembered birthdays when my brother's accomplishments were celebrated with grand parties, while my own were acknowledged with a quick good job and little more. I remembered our parents' eyes lighting up at his smallest successes, while mine were met with polite nods, as if my efforts were expected to be mediocre by default. Even now, I could feel the sting of those long-ago dismissals, as though the room itself still carried the weight of favoritism and neglect. School events were no different. I could see myself standing nervously at the edge, waiting for approval that never came, while my brother basked in applause, praised for his charm and cleverness. Teachers favoured him, parents lavished attention on him, and I was left learning to navigate a world where my worth was always measured against his. The echoes of those moments lingered in adulthood, resurfacing in boardrooms, meetings, and social situations where he seemed to glide ahead effortlessly, while I struggled to make my voice heard. Every slight, big or small, built the architecture of my simmering determination. Professional life had been its own battlefield. I had poured myself into work, long hours, and sacrifices that went unseen, while he capitalized on every opportunity, often at my expense. Ideas I had carefully nurtured were co-opted, presentations polished and sold as his own, and credit that should have been mine quietly redirected. At the time, I accepted it, internalizing a sense of inadequacy, telling myself that patience and persistence were virtues that would eventually pay off. Now, reflecting on those years, I realized they had forged something stronger, a quiet resilience and a burning desire to reclaim what was always rightfully mine. The contrast between past weakness and present determination felt stark. Back then, I was overlooked, underestimated, and pushed aside. Now I was simmering with controlled fury, a carefully kindled fire waiting for the right moment. The humiliation I had endured had taught me the rules of the game, and I had become a student of strategy without even realizing it. Each memory, though painful, reinforced the person I had become, capable, patient, and quietly lethal in terms of calculated action. That contrast between the weak, powerless child and the adult poised for vindication was at the core of my resolve. Over the next few months, I buried myself in work, not for recognition, but to reclaim a sense of control that had always eluded me. Every small victory, whether closing a deal, mentoring a junior colleague, or helping a friend navigate a personal crisis, became a quiet triumph. No one applauded, no one noticed, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The satisfaction wasn't in being seen, it was in knowing I was steadily building something solid beneath the radar, a foundation my brother could never touch or anticipate. Each success, however minor, stitched together a confidence that had been frayed by years of neglect and ridicule. I started noticing how people responded differently to me in subtle ways. Colleagues who had once dismissed my suggestions now sought my advice. Friends began relying on me for guidance, and even strangers treated me with a respect I had rarely felt before. These small shifts in perception, though invisible to my brother, gave me an understated power. It was the kind of influence that couldn't be taken away, a currency that accumulated quietly, compounding into something significant over time. Helping others became part of this slow burn strategy. I intervened discreetly when someone was being overlooked, offered resources or introductions that mattered, and supported those around me without fanfare. Each act reinforced my network, my credibility, and my sense of purpose. The contrast between my past of invisibility and the present accumulation of quiet authority was energizing. I wasn't yet ready to confront my brother publicly, but I was planting the seeds that would ensure the day of reckoning came on my terms, fully calculated and impossible to ignore. Everywhere I turned, my brother's arrogance seemed impossible to escape. Social media posts, casual boasts at industry events, and even the occasional phone call were all reminders of his inflated sense of superiority. He flaunted his wealth like a trophy, sending pictures of luxury cars, vacations, and high-profile meetings, while dismissing my own accomplishments with offhand comments or thinly veiled mockery. The more he flaunted, the more I felt the old sting of invisibility, but this time it sparked something else, a growing awareness that his confidence was brittle, built on assumption rather than substance. Friends and colleagues often commented on his success, praising him publicly, and for a moment the familiar FOMO crept in, whispering doubts and old insecurities. But I reminded myself that visibility didn't equal power. My victories were quiet but steady, layered with intention and depth that his theatrics lacked. The status tension between us had never been clearer. He controlled perception, but I was quietly building real influence, the kind that mattered when the stakes were highest. Then, one evening, he mentioned an upcoming family gathering, a celebration of his latest business milestone. The casual way he described it sent a chill through me. He planned to flaunt his dominance, to publicly assert the narrative of superiority he had woven for years. I sensed the impending trap immediately, the looming possibility that he would humiliate me, or, worse, my children. Again. The thought tightened my chest, but underneath the tension, a pulse of anticipation surged. I was ready to meet arrogance with strategy, and as he laughed about how everyone would marvel at his success, I quietly began planning how this gathering would become a turning point. That night, as the house settled into silence and my children slept, I allowed myself to think with clarity, letting the anger settle into a focused determination. I needed more than impulsive reactions. I needed a plan, a precise strategy that would turn his arrogance against him. I began mapping it out in my mind, step by step, like a chessboard where every piece had purpose. First, I needed leverage, financial, social, and legal. Every small victory I had accumulated over the past months became a tool, quietly assembled to challenge his unchecked confidence. I considered the company shares he bragged about so freely, the contracts he signed without double-checking, the weak points in his empire that only an insider could see. Socially, I thought about the allies I had quietly nurtured. Employees, friends, distant family members who had been ignored or dismissed by him. Legally, I traced past agreements and loopholes, discovering possibilities he had assumed were irrelevant. Each thread became a potential strand in a web that could ensnare him completely should I pull it at the right moment. As I rehearsed scenarios in my mind, I imagined his smug smile fading, his confidence crumbling as he realized he had underestimated me. The tension was intoxicating. It was a mix of excitement and patience, knowing that the payoff would be worth the meticulous work. I reminded myself to remain calm publicly, to let him continue his boastful parade while I quietly positioned myself for the ultimate reversal. Every action, every silent victory, every alliance, every document collected was a seed of the reckoning that would come. and I felt the first rush of satisfaction at knowing the moment of power reversal was slowly but surely taking shape. Over the following weeks, I focused on quietly strengthening my network, connecting with people my brother had long ignored or underestimated. Employees who had grown frustrated under his domineering management began to confide in me, sharing small insights and frustrations that revealed cracks in his armor. I listened, offered guidance, and helped them feel heard, never boasting, never claiming credit, just planting seeds of trust and loyalty that would one day matter in ways he couldn't foresee. Slowly, I realized I was cultivating influence in corners he had taken for granted, and the power of that realization gave me an almost imperceptible thrill. Family members who had been dismissed or sidelined also became subtle allies. Cousins, distant relatives, and even a few in-laws who had long resented his arrogance began turning to me for support or advice. Their small acknowledgements, smiles, or offhand compliments might have seemed trivial to anyone else, but I understood the weight they carried. In private conversations, I could sense their surprise at my calm competence, their quiet FOMO as they realized I was quietly becoming a figure of respect and authority that even my brother had overlooked. Industry contacts, too, began noticing the difference. While he was loud and boastful, I was deliberate, measured, and consistently reliable. Invitations to meetings, requests for collaboration, and nods of acknowledgement from people he assumed were loyal to him became my quiet triumphs. The contrast was clear. He relied on visibility and bravado, while I was building lasting influence rooted in competence, discretion, and trust. Each connection strengthened my position. Each subtle acknowledgement increased the anticipation for the moment I would finally assert control. And the knowledge that others were beginning to notice my rising authority filled me with a controlled, exhilarating satisfaction. In the weeks leading up to the family gathering, I mastered the art of appearing unaffected, wearing a calm facade while beneath the surface, tension coiled like a spring. Every conversation with my brother became a delicate dance. I smiled when he bragged, nodded politely when he dismissed my achievements, and let him believe he was untouchable. Outwardly, I seemed ordinary, even subdued, but inside every detail of his arrogance, every slip, and every overconfident word was being filed away, stored for the precise moment it would serve me. He continued flaunting wealth, boasting about business deals, and casually undermining me in front of mutual acquaintances. Each instance stung. But the dramatic irony was intoxicating. He believed he was in complete control, while I silently anticipated his unraveling. I allowed him to parade his dominance, knowing that overconfidence is a fatal weakness, and the more visible his arrogance, the more potent my eventual reversal would be. My children, now seeing my composure, felt safe and grounded, unaware of the meticulous planning quietly taking shape. The contrast between his bluster and my calculated patience grew sharper every day. I revelled in the irony, savouring the knowledge that he could not see the storm gathering behind the calm exterior. It was a delicate balance of restraint and anticipation, a slow escalation of tension designed to make the eventual reversal inevitable and satisfying. Every meeting, every casual remark, and every boast from him now served as a reminder that patience was not weakness. It was the most dangerous weapon I had. The night of the family business event arrived, and I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and calm. My brother arrived early, all charm and swagger, greeting everyone with exaggerated confidence as if the room belonged entirely to him. I followed behind, smiling politely, letting him take centre stage while I observed quietly, noting every interaction, every glimmer of admiration, or envy, that he assumed was solely his. Then, the moment came. A discussion about a new contract arose, one he assumed he fully understood. I spoke up, casually dropping details only someone with deep insider knowledge could know, correcting minor misconceptions and offering insights that subtly outshone him. The reactions were instantaneous. Eyes shifted, nods of agreement began to favor me, and murmurs of approval rippled through the room. My brother's confident smile faltered just slightly, replaced by an almost imperceptible tension. He stumbled over a word, tried to regain control, but I continued calmly, weaving information into the conversation that demonstrated competence he could not match. The room, once his stage, now subtly acknowledged my authority, and the dramatic shift was thrilling in its quiet power. A colleague, whom he often dismissed, leaned in to thank me for clarifying a complex point. The acknowledgement was small but potent, a crack in his armor. I could see the frustration flicker across my brother's face, a twitch of recognition that maybe, just maybe, he had misjudged me. My children, watching from a distance, could feel the shift, too, sensing that something had changed in the dynamics of the room. It wasn't loud or explosive yet, but it was enough to sow doubt in him and plant the first seed of public humiliation. By the end of the discussion, he was forced to concede small points, his authority quietly undermined, and I walked away with a private satisfaction, knowing the stage was set for the next, far more devastating reversal. The tension had been building for months, and finally the opportunity to confront him arrived at a family gathering. I waited for the right moment, letting him continue his casual arrogance while I carefully chose my words. When the room felt charged with expectation, I stepped forward, my voice steady but edged with emotion. I recounted calmly yet pointedly the countless times he had belittled me, undermined my work, and dismissed my efforts as if they were inconsequential. I reminded him of the public humiliation he had inflicted on my children, the casual cruelty that had left scars deeper than anyone could see. Family members shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, some staring, as the history of emotional abuse unfolded before them. I spoke not with rage, but with measured clarity, each word carrying the weight of years of neglect and favoritism. My children's eyes were fixed on me, pride and relief mingling with the lingering hurt, and I could feel their trust in me deepen. The dramatic contrast between his smug composure and my composed intensity was unmistakable. He was suddenly exposed, forced to confront the consequences of a lifetime of arrogance. He tried to interject, to excuse past actions with half-hearted justifications, but the room's attention had shifted. Even those who had once sided with him began to sense the moral truth in my words. For the first time, he wasn't the one commanding respect. I was. This confrontation wasn't just about me. It was about showing my children that injustice could be challenged, that emotional cruelty had limits, and that patience and strategy could transform years of pain into a moment of moral triumph. By the time I finished, the energy in the room had shifted irreversibly, marking the first real victory in a long-awaited reckoning. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than he expected. It was during a routine board meeting, the kind he treated as his personal stage, full of casual arrogance and patronizing remarks. I had remained quiet until that moment, letting him bask in the illusion of control while I prepared the final pieces of my plan. As he launched into yet another self-congratulatory monologue, I cleared my throat and spoke with deliberate calm. Before we continue, I think it's important everyone knows who holds the majority shares of this company. The words landed like a weight in the room, and a hush fell over the assembled colleagues and family members. I watched as his confident smirk wavered, then faltered. The first crack in the armor he had assumed was invincible. I revealed the documentation, meticulously prepared and legally binding, showing that I had quietly acquired controlling interest months ago. Every clause he had ignored, every assumption he had made about my lack of influence had been accounted for. He stared at the papers, then at the faces around him, his arrogance colliding violently with reality. The murmurs grew louder, colleagues exchanging astonished glances, the FOMO and shock spreading like wildfire. "Wait, you own the controlling shares?" he stammered, his voice a mix of disbelief and panic. I nodded, letting the silence stretch, letting the room fully absorb the truth. Every insult he had ever thrown, every belittling remark, every casual dismissal was now dwarfed by the scale of his own humiliation. His body language, once full of dominance, shrank under the weight of exposure, and the moral karma was undeniable. I had not only regained control of the company, but had done so in a way that forced him to witness the consequences of his arrogance firsthand. The room had shifted irrevocably. My children's eyes shone with pride. Friends and employees looked at me with new respect, and even distant family members whispered acknowledgements of the reversal. He had treated me as weak, invisible, and insignificant, yet in his moment of highest confidence, he had forgotten the one lesson that mattered. Underestimating me was a mistake he would never recover from. I watched as the realization fully hit him. The man who had mocked, belittled, and humiliated us was now subordinate to the very person he had assumed was powerless. In that moment, every slight, every act of favoritism, every childhood humiliation came full circle, delivering a revenge that was both strategic and profoundly satisfying. The arrogance that had once defined him crumbled, replaced by the stark understanding that control and respect are not given. They are earned quietly, patiently, and, when necessary, seized with precision. By the time the news of the takeover spread beyond the boardroom, my brother's facade of invincibility had completely crumbled. Employees whispered in hallways, colleagues offered congratulatory nods, and friends who had long witnessed his arrogance now approached me with admiration and subtle awe. The contrast was undeniable. The man who had once towered over me, dismissing every effort and belittling every achievement, now appeared small, shrinking under the collective recognition of my competence and cunning. His public collapse was more satisfying than I had imagined, each reaction around him amplifying the justice that had quietly been in motion for months. Family gatherings became a stage for this transformation. Relatives who had previously overlooked me now sought conversation, asking questions, seeking insight, and acknowledging that I had quietly become a figure of authority and influence. My children's faces reflected pride and relief, seeing the person who had been underestimated for so long finally validated in front of everyone. My spouse squeezed my hand, a quiet gesture of shared triumph, and I felt the weight of years of silent struggle lift from my shoulders. Even my brother's closest allies could not ignore the shift. The arrogance that had once inspired envy now drew pity and incredulity. Every boast he had made, every casual insult hurled my way, now seemed almost foolish in retrospect. It was not only a personal victory but a social one, a recalibration of respect and status that resonated across professional and familial circles alike. Standing there, amidst quiet nods and subtle acknowledgements, I experienced a profound emotional relief. Vindication had arrived, and it was complete, public, and undeniable. Later that evening, after the echoes of the family gathering had settled, I sat alone and allowed myself to reflect. The journey had been long, fraught with humiliation, doubt, and quiet fury, but it had also forged a strength I never fully recognized in myself. I thought back to the childhood memories, the favoritism, the subtle betrayals, and the countless times I had been dismissed. Each of those moments, painful as they were, had taught me patience, strategy, and resilience. I felt a bittersweet pride for having endured without losing my integrity, and a deep satisfaction knowing I had reclaimed not just control, but respect. I considered my children, their eyes wide with admiration and relief, and I realized that my actions had taught them something invaluable. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it builds quietly, with thought, patience, and unwavering determination. The empowerment I now felt was not merely for myself, but shared with my family, a legacy of resilience and emotional intelligence. The road had been hard, but the lessons were clear. Injustice can be challenged, arrogance can be humbled, and perseverance combined with strategy can turn humiliation into triumph. Even as I smiled quietly, a twinge of sadness lingered. There would always be remnants of past pain, and my brother's arrogance had left scars on relationships that couldn't be fully erased. Yet the catharsis of seeing him humbled, the validation of my efforts, and the affirmation of my own worth outweighed any lingering bitterness. In the quiet of that night, I understood the full weight of the journey. Growth, empowerment, and redemption were not just possible. They were inevitable when patience, cunning, and moral clarity guided every step. Months later, life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't thought possible. My children laughed freely, no longer shadowed by doubt or embarrassment, and our family dinners were filled with genuine warmth rather than tension. The business thrived under careful management, and while my brother still existed in the periphery, the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. I watched my children play, their eyes bright with confidence, and I knew the lessons of patience, strategy, and self-respect had taken root. I often reflected on the journey, the long years of neglect, the humiliation, and the careful, quiet steps that had brought me here. Success, I realized, wasn't measured solely by wealth or titles. It was measured by the ability to rise above cruelty, to protect those you love, and to reclaim dignity without losing yourself. My story was a reminder that even when life feels unfair, perseverance and intelligence can turn the tide. And so I moved forward, quietly proud, aware that the power I held was now a tool for protection, empowerment, and guidance. Life had been rebalanced, not through revenge alone, but through patience, moral clarity, and unwavering resolve. The past would always be part of me, but the future, bright and earned, stretched ahead, a testament to endurance, cunning, and the quiet strength of rising from humiliation to triumph.